How do you recruit and retain great staff? What does great culture look like? How do you have difficult conversations? The Supporting Leaders podcast connects with leaders in the field to gain insights into these leadership challenges and beyond. Enjoy the show. On today's episode of Supporting Leaders, we have Ryan Page Ryan. As Ryan and I know in the show, we have known each other for 20 years. And so Ryan shares with us her journey on the social services side as she started in an environment where there were helpers in her family all the way to where she is now for Department of Human Services and her policy work. So she talks a lot about change within an organization. She shares her growth journey. She shares a lot of wisdom and insight about not just career change and development and growth, but also her personal career or her personal story of change, growth, and development. This is an episode you will not want to miss. Here's a little bit more about Ryan. She is the Child Care Regulatory Program Manager and Team Lead of the Child Care Bureau with the Department of Human Services. One of her main duties is to assess and implement federal and state policy requirements for licensed child care providers throughout the state. Ryan has a bachelor's degree in psychology from Iowa State, a master's in criminal justice from St. Ambrose. She completed the Certified Public Manager program from Drake in 2018. She has spent over 15 years in social services and has worked for the department for 12 years in child welfare and child care services. She's a member of Early Childhood Governance, Planning and Administration Committee, the Early Childhood Iowa Steering Committee, State Child Care Advisory Committee, and the Iowa After School Alliance Strategic Leadership Team. Enjoy this next episode. All right. Well, I know I say a lot of times I've got a very special guest on the show, but today it really is a special guest on the show, Ryan Page Ryan. And Ryan, I was thinking the other day, has it been 20 years now that we've known each other?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing while I was out walking yesterday, that it's right on the cusp.
Yeah, that seems unbelievable that we're that old, that we would have been in college 20 years ago, but here we are. And so I thought you would be a fantastic guest to have on the show because obviously I know a little bit about your career journey, or a lot about your career journey. And you seeing where you started when we were in college, and back then I remember you going to work with Yes, and you'll have to tell us a little bit about what that is. And now seeing your work and how you advocate for policy and are a policy change maker for the state has just been so incredible to watch this journey. So share with those of us listening who may not be as familiar with you what your career journey has been.
Yeah. So I honestly think I have to go all the way back to just growing up. My family, they were like natural helpers. I had two different friends that lived with us for over 6 months. I watched my parents become approved foster parents for a friend of mine. And so I guess that just kind of fueled something in me. So, I worked at Youth and Shelter Services, as you mentioned, while we were in college, and it was substance abuse treatment for youth, 13 to 17. We had a girls program and a boys program. And I was getting my degree in psychology, and I didn't really know what I was going to do with it after I graduated. And so I decided I needed to go get my master's. So moved to Davenport, got my master's in criminal justice, really thought I wanted to go down this probation parole track. And throughout that time, I was working at a residential program for girls and that were part of the child welfare system typically, and realized that that's where I wanted to be, was child welfare. And so I started working at the department in 2007 at the Department of Human Services, and began as a child protection worker. And from there, just kind of moved around and ended up in the position I'm at today, which is as a team lead of our Child Care Bureau in the policy division. And oddly enough, I worked in childcare back when I was 16. So I've done this full circle of coming back to the world of childcare and making sure that kids are healthy and safe and, developing good brains through access to quality childcare. And we know it's an economic, driver for our state. And I think the pandemic has showed that even more, that without accessing childcare, our economy cannot recover. So,
I love that you just ended with that because I'm thinking about as you've transitioned into each one of these roles, has your why changed? Has your purpose for doing what you do changed? Or is there the same why, it just looks a little bit different in each of these roles?
I, I think that's a great question. And I think you have to find your why in whatever job you're doing. So I remember interviewing for the job I'm in now, and I've been here 7 years in this position. And one of his was, why you or whatever. And I said, if we don't care, who is going to do it? So if we are not prepared to do the work, then who else is out there to do it for us? And so I guess that became a passion point for me. Caring about child welfare is one thing. I mean, going in crisis and trauma and working with kids, and families, that's very different than kind of looking at it from a policy side and saying, are kids safe when they go to childcare? How do our low income families, how do we support them access childcare so that they can go to work and they can go to school? So it's the same. It's about supporting families and children of Iowa, but the why it is different. But the passion point is the children and families of Iowa and how we serve them best.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And I do see the similarities in the why and all of that. It's the what has been a little bit different as you've gone. So as you've moved into each of these different spots, I'm just thinking about, like, I remember when you would like tell some of the stories when were first working for DHS, or whether you were at a residential place. And there's a lot of this direct contact with families and direct contact with kids. And so as you've transitioned, what have been some of the rewards and some of the challenges that have come with each new step in your journey?
Yeah. When you work directly with kids, there's sometimes there's these times that you would see like the light bulb, or you're working with a family and you get to a point where you truly believe that there's a successful shift in mindset to, you know, feel like kids are going to be safe or are going to thrive in their homes. And that is very different than what I do now in policy. And I don't get to see those things, but I also get to be involved in the conversation of how do we improve how we expect childcare providers to serve families in our state. So it's not about being on the ground and doing the direct work. It's about saying, we have an expectation of you as a childcare provider to serve your families in a particular way. And being able to do some of those things
Mm-hmm.
is really, really cool.
Yeah, I think that is very similar in both of our career journeys, because when you think about both of us, we both started in this place where we had direct contact with kids. And hearing you say that, I really recognize that myself too, that now I feel like I'm in a position where I still have a positive impact in kids, but it's in a much different way than I had before. So, in thinking about your
Yeah.
journey like that, were you was it intentional that you knew, like, okay, one day, like, so I'm starting my career, I'm in direct contact with kids right now, it's great, but I know one day I'm going to kind of move up and I'm going to be sitting where I'm sitting right now? Or did it just kind of happen and you took the risk and you took the opportunities as it came?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I took risk and opportunity. I had honestly, when you're in the crux of doing the work, you don't really understand what's happening above you that
Mm-hmm.
makes the work happen. You're just going in and doing your job. And so to get to a point where I'm able to facilitate change from a different level is super cool. But I also I had no intention. I was not a policy person. I certainly wasn't a bureaucrat. And I was probably kind of anti system, but really what took place was that I found this niche in policy and writing and administrative rules. I write administrative rules that are in response to state law or federal law and legislation. So being able to do that and say, this is how we're going to implement things, doing systems thinking, building networks and partnerships, those are things that move systems forward. We can't do it without all of the strengths around the table, because I certainly am not an expert in everything. And I need the people that are around me. And that's how you build good teams. And that's how you get really good work done.
Yeah. So every single role that you've ever had, I have always felt like, oh my gosh, that has to be so stressful. Like whether it's going into a stressful situation in a home or now in your position, like things that come out of your department or that you work on, they're in the newspaper, so like, I just imagine that has so much stress with it. So I am really curious how you figured out how to, manage stress. And does it look the same as back in the day when you were, 20 years old, how you managed stress? What's that look like for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. I mean, it is stressful, and we're one of the largest state agencies in Iowa, and we cover a lot of things. And even if it's not directly impacting me, sometimes with media coverage, it's tough, right? I mean, people don't love the Department of Human Services.
Right.
And some do, of course, but uh, it is tough. And there's a lot of work that goes into it. Right now, we're in legislative session and it's really busy. That does mean that I'm working past 4:30, or that does mean I have to drop what I'm doing and go to the Capitol. Those are the realities. But it's funny you ask that, because I didn't do a whole lot, back in the day. I didn't. I hung out with friends and I did my schoolwork, and that was about it. And as you get older, you realize that you have to find this balance to your life. And that's actually something that's really hard for me, because I'm naturally a worker. So when the work needs to get done, we get the work done. It's not, well, it's okay, I work 8 to 4:30 and I'll do it tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I'm constantly processing information on what we need to do. So I about 5 years ago, I started exercising, and it was just a thing. It was working out with the girls across the street in the neighborhood, and then it turned into signing up for a 5K, and then it turned into signing up for a fundraising weightlifting competition. Not that I was going to win, but it was an activity. It was something to move forward. And so I think it's super important that we're setting personal goals to offset work goals or work products. So now I am always like kind of striving for personal growth, even if that's, reading books um, about genetics. Oh my gosh, I'm reading a book about genetics right now. I've gone full nerd. It's fine. I love it. But we have to find those balances in our life and keep moving forward in ways that fuel us personally and professionally.
I have really admired that journey that you've been on because, knowing you since college, like we'd go have a good time. We'd get bebops the next day. I mean, I don't think the two of us ever did any sort of like physical activity together. And so to watch you now, like,
Now I'm gonna cut you off
okay, what
there.
have we
We went
done?
to the rec a
Did
couple
we?
times.
Okay.
Like, yes, we totally went to the rec a couple of times.
And it was probably just
Certainly
like,
not consistent.
it was probably just to like check out guys and not actually like work out. But, but I love what
I
you
feel like
just
there was a
shared.
Zumba class or whatever, like before it was Zumba. I feel like we did something like that
Okay,
once.
so yeah, so something, but I love what you shared because like how you made it sound like it was so, because I think if somebody looks at your social media now, they see this person who is fit, is active, is doing a lot of different things, but to hear you talk about like it started with working out with the neighbors across the street. And I remember that, like, and then it started with doing a 5K. Like it just makes it seem manageable, doable. And for people listening too, I think to get over that like just because you weren't something at one time in your life doesn't mean that you can't be that thing now.
Yeah. And I think so what you just said is super important because not only from a physical health perspective, but even as a learner, I skated in college. I just kind of did the bare minimum to get it done. And then when I went and got my master's in criminal justice, I found my niche. I found that place where what I was learning about was interesting and I wanted to engage and I wanted to
Yeah.
grow through my education. Now, like I'm soaking up every opportunity I can to learn more. So I went through the certified public manager program. I'm currently the White Riley Peterson Fellowship out of Furman University. I'm going to go back and get my MPA. That's the new thing that that I've
Yep.
decided to do.
Yep.
So constantly moving forward in ways
Yeah.
that fuel my soul. But you're right. When I was in high school, I would literally call in sick to school on days where I would have to give a speech. I could not speak in front of people. I was terrified. And now I talk to agency directors. I go and do, I'm sorry, that's my dogs. I go and do legislative meetings. I have talked in front of 200 people at a national conference before. These are things that are very natural to me now that were not something I was able to do before.
Yeah, so let's just take that example of, speaking, public speaking. And being an educator too, you see it all the time. Kids who feel like I am so anxious about delivering this speech in class, and as a teacher, you're like, oh my gosh, you're going to have to do this all the time. Like, so how did that transition happen? Where was it just a matter of just doing it? How did you develop that confidence or skill along the way?
So I think, yes. I mean, once you do it, you get to a point where it's like, I don't have a choice. I have to do
Mhm.
this. But competency breeds confidence. So when I feel like I know what I'm talking about, when I am identified as an expert, then it feels more comfortable to talk about because
Hmm.
I'm confident in myself with that. Um, and then what kind of happens is, I guess people realize, if they think you know what you're talking about, then they invite you to do something else, and they invite
Yeah.
you to do something else, and so before you know it, you're on committees and you're presenting at things and you're having all of these conversations, and then it just becomes very natural to be able to do it. But for me, it all started with competency.
Hmm. Okay, so let's talk about this term. We had talked about this briefly before the show, and nobody's talked about this yet. So I think this will be interesting. But imposter syndrome. So that there's a connection between what we were just talking about. I think. But is that a place that you've been? And like, if so, then like, how did you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm there all the time. I I joke around that I have people fooled. I'm like, I'm just making it up as I go. I'm making up
Mhm.
life as I go. And but the reality is, I've been doing the work. I educate myself. I continue to professionally grow, personally grow.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I know I'm competent in an area to do something,
Right.
but I certainly feel like there are times I'm invited to the table and I'm saying, why am I at this table? I don't know what I can bring to this table because I'm so far outside of my scope. But then I'm there and I do find that I have something to give. I do find that I have opportunities to speak up and share about something and have people value those opinions, which it's, yeah, you just, so I have everybody fooled. That's like the easiest way to say it is
Well,
I don't know. Once it's a hurdle. And right now we're doing some work with federal money as part of the COVID relief acts that has come down. And I mean, this is pushing the boundaries of my skill set. And so, but a year from now, I'm going to be able to talk about this as an expert because it's something that we were able to go over the hurdles successfully, implement and go from there. So,
I'm so glad that you wanted to talk about that because I think sometimes people look from the outside at certain people and think like they've have it together, they've always had it together. And I think that that's really normal for people to feel this imposter syndrome. I mean, even like as a principal, sometimes I'd step back and be like, I can't believe anybody would let me do this. And again, like you said, like not that I didn't have the education, the training, the confidence, the skills, but like making certain decisions sometimes is like, holy cow, like people trust me to be able to do this. And like you said, I think the more you do it, that's where I think it's important to listen to people who went down the road before you, because the more you do it, the more comfortable you get, the more confident you get, and those strengths just continue to build.
well, and I think it's important that we understand the history of how things work and why. Um, from a policy perspective, I will look at things and say, okay, this is the decision that I want to make on this. But what did we used to do? Why did we do it that way? Should we be doing it that
Mm-hmm.
way? And if we do not make decisions while understanding the historical perspective of where we are at today, then we very likely might have some unintended consequences that we're not prepared for. So for me, making decisions has to have historical context and has to have multiple people at the table to figure out what those consequences might be, positive or negative.
Hmm.
Because we want to know all of those things before we implement change.
That's so refreshing to hear because I think I can oftentimes get caught up myself in the who cares? Let's move forward. We have this change. We have the future, like just constant eye on the future and constant, and like I'm not adverse to change and just wanting to like move forward. But hearing you say that about like the historical context is important. And I think that flows into the next question I was going to ask you, but like you're in this large bureaucratic organization, like what's the hardest part of leading change in a system like that?
Yeah, I think it's fun because I call my position like the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to supervise people directly, but I am a lead. And what that means is I'm kind of a right hand to the boss. Um, and I get to do all the cool stuff, right? I get to see things all the way through, but I also get to go and meet with stakeholders and build partnerships and connections. And sometimes that's how you get the work done. It's not necessarily that I have to physically say, this is what I'm going to do to X. It might be building relationships and partnerships with a system of people, and that's how you move change.
Hmm.
So there's ways, of course, that I have to, if we have a federal law that says this is what states need to do, then yes, that's what I have to do, to implement that change. But how do you bring people on the journey to be supportive of that change, or
Right.
to understand the why behind the change? That's where your partners come in. That's where the conversations and networking come in, because they can talk about, this is why it's important to us. This is how we're moving forward. And we need to have those conversations with our lawmakers as well, so that they understand why a change may or may not be a good thing, or even just the difficulty of implementing a change. Sometimes something sounds really, really good on paper, but then you get down to the strategic planning of how to do that work, and you find the barriers to implementation, and you have to work through those. And I mean, that's actually really fun to do, is working through the barriers to get to a successful end game of implementation of something.
It sounds really slow, but you seem to really have the patience to like hold on through it to get to the positive outcome.
Yeah, I mean, coming from child welfare, where, we had crisis calls, being on call, going out in the middle of the night, because there's been an allegation of abuse or
Mhm.
neglect. The speed of that type of work is obviously very, very different than, working in a policy division. But, it's about incremental steps forward, and and getting to that point where you have successfully implemented something. When we had a federal law change in 2014, we had to get into compliance by 2016. And it took every bit of those 2 years to move us forward. And you can't just change things on paper and think that it's going to change, um, in the lives of people, in the hearts
Mhm.
of people.
Yeah.
Um, you have to bring people along on a journey with you, and that takes time. We can't shove change down people's throats. We have to bring them along, and understanding and supporting, and allowing some grace for them to be frustrated or angry about that one more thing that they're going to have to do, that one more report they're going to have to write, or that one more, for you in education, that one more conference, that one more reach out to the family. um, Understanding that change is really hard for some people, and even if it's good change, it's just hard. And so how do we allow some grace and flexibility for people to take their own time to come along on that journey with us?
So much wisdom there. I feel like so much of leadership sometimes too is that managing and navigating change and helping people with it. And what you shared just gave me some really great insights and reminders, even in my current position. So, in thinking about talking about your journey, and you mentioned you're going back to school now. So, what's next for you? What do you see in the future of your own career?
Oh, I have no idea. I joke that I don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But I have found that I really, really do like policy. Uh, I don't like bureaucracy, but it is what it is. That's part of our system. And if I can play a small role in implementing change, or even just being the giver of knowledge, um, if somebody, like I was saying before, if somebody wants to implement something, if I can be the person to say, we can do that.
Hmm.
Here's who might support that. Here's who might be in opposition. This is how much it's going to cost. The way you have it written doesn't really work. We should write it a different way. Or, those are really important things for people to understand when we are implementing changes, particularly laws. And so, maybe I'll end up doing something at a federal level, or maybe, um, maybe I'll stay in the position I'm in for a while. I've been doing it for 7 years. I love my job. But I also know that if my why changes, if that passion point changes, then it's going to be time to find something else. When you start feeling burnout and you no longer know your why, then you need to start thinking differently.
Yeah.
So, yes, I'm going to get my master's in public administration. I'm going to start doing that this summer. And that will open doors. What doors I want it to open, I don't necessarily
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But I will likely always be in a policy based role.
That's a great perspective because it's been interesting to talk to people that, some people have it all mapped out and they know exactly the next role they want and the next position, which is fantastic. But I think some people too, you and I are similar in this, where it's more, I'm going to make sure that I have every door open to me and I'm not going to totally have it lined up. I'm just going to be open. I'm just going to be open to what that next way or how I can serve. And like you said, it might be the same position for the next 15, 20 years, but open to the opportunity. So I'm going to end with the final question. What do you know for sure about leadership? And, when you said earlier too, currently you're not in a position of supervising others. However, I do hope people understand too that leadership isn't just managing and supervising other people, because you certainly, continue to play a leadership role. So whether it's in your current role or just, understanding the organization that you're in or some of your previous experiences, what's something that you've learned about leadership that you know for sure?
So I might end up giving you a little bit of a long-winded answer because I think it's such a great question, and it already was like prompting things in my head. I think that I'm looking back at this. There's like this meme, and it's this little girl, and she's going, "I'm not bossy. I have leadership skills,"
Yes.
and I feel like that was me as a young child. My parents will talk about, oh my God, we thought you were going to be a lawyer because you were always, arguing or coming up with whatever. And, but at some point that I lost that.
Hmm.
Um, I was maybe kind of that natural leader in that quiet space. I didn't want to be seen too much. I wasn't raising my hand. But if it was a group project, I was like, okay, who's going to do what? And I was kind of that organizational
Huh.
person. But I think that happens with young girls, particularly, that at some point something is kind of stifled internally. And I think that's normal for adolescents as well. We don't necessarily feel confident in things, but moving forward, understanding how to lead people, for me, it's about relationships and it's about partnerships. And it's the team that I'm on, when I came on, there were some gaps in who talked to who was friends with who. And I don't want to say, oh, it's because of me, but we have such an amazing team because we all understand each other's strengths.
Hmm.
We understand areas where people might need a little bit additional support, and we work through that together, and we don't leave anybody out when we're making decisions. If it's something that might impact my colleague, I make sure that they are at least aware that I'm doing something that could impact the work that they're doing. And you and I, we've talked about this, and I want to bring up Real Colors real quick
Mm-hmm.
because I've been a facilitator of this Real Colors personality tool for a couple of years now. And that alone has been so helpful to me to understand personalities, how we are different, how the way that I view the world is different than some other people, and how you communicate effectively with people that are not your personality type. So I am very like abrupt, kind of, always moving forward. And hey, did you see the email I sent 37 seconds ago? And, you know, and then I've got friends who are like, hey, how are you?
Yeah,
Right? I mean,
right.
they need that first. And so I find ways to realize that about myself, because we have to keep ourselves in check. We have to self-reflect and recognize that how we communicate with people um, can make or break a relationship or how we move forward. And if we can't realize that other people might communicate differently, so even the 5 love languages, you think about that, um, how we interact with people is one of the most important things about how to be an effective leader. If you don't know how to communicate with your team, if you don't know how to communicate with individuals who think differently than you do, you are not going to be successful. So it's, understanding each other, respecting each other, bringing people to the table, making sure that everyone's voices are heard equally. We don't need to have a hierarchy when it comes to moving systems forward. Yeah, we have a boss and somebody will make the final decision. Absolutely. But let's make well-informed decisions by supporting everybody on the team.
That's so good. And I feel like, I mean, there's so many things in there that you just said that I'm like, oh my,
Imposter syndrome.
I want to dig into that
Just
further.
rolling with it.
But I'm like, okay, this could be a podcast that was like 2 hours long and it'd be amazing. But maybe you'll have to be like a recurring guest and maybe we interview some people together. That could be a blast. But Ryan, I appreciate you taking the time
I
out,
would love to know, Lisa, I would love to know, as you do the podcast, I had an opportunity to listen to a few yesterday, and they're amazing. And you've got some super awesome leaders that you've been talking with. But I would be curious to know who else might, not even intentionally, but has an awareness of personality assessments or personality tools and how they may use that or incorporate that into their leadership, because I think it'd be super awesome to tap into some more conversation about that.
You know what's like one of the areas that like I feel like you and I could talk about too is just like, so we've done the DISC assessment in our organization and it's fantastic. And our chief has been good enough to recognize that it can't be a one and done. And so we have had everyone in the organization take it. We've continued to like make it relevant, but you definitely have to be intentional about it. And so I'd like love to talk to people about like, how do you make sure that that becomes something that's useful and not just like oh, okay, I learned about it and now it's in my back pocket.
Yeah. It's funny because when I'm interacting with people, especially some colleagues, when I do my weekend teaching for the community college, uh, I can find people and I'm like, that person's a blue, or because the real
Mm-hmm.
colors, it's 4 colors, and I can
Mm-hmm.
say that person is definitely a green. Like I can kind of start picking people out, and I might not be 100% accurate,
Yeah.
but I can find pieces of individuals that relate to personality styles that I understand, and then I can decide how I communicate with that person. And having an awareness to do that it's so profound.
Right. And so like in one of the interviews I asked the person, they do an assessment with their staff too, or he's created one in his consulting organization, helps work with companies about it. But I asked, if you're managing a larger group of people, like how do you do that? And like what you said, like you can begin to identify, like it's not an infinite number of personalities, right? Like there's a certain number, and yes, everyone's unique and brings their own experiences and skills and backgrounds to the table. But like you were saying, I think that there are some very concrete, distinct things that you can begin to categorize people a little bit and use that information to enhance your relationship.
Absolutely.
But it's intentional, and being intentional takes work, especially when we live in this crazy, fast paced COVID Zoom kind of world.
And I love that. Being intentional takes work. That's 100% accurate.
Right. Well, again, I mean, seriously, we could talk the rest of the afternoon. Maybe sometime we need to do this too with like a glass of wine in our hand and like really get down to business on this in these conversations. But I so much appreciate talking to you. And, you know, we talk about all kinds of different things. So this was really cool to be able to just chat about these things specific to leadership and work and pick your brain. So thank you so much for sharing with us.
We've come a long way from philosophical debate on the patio of the apartment. We've come a long way from there, but we're still really good at those conversations. So this was awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Supporting Leaders podcast. For more on supporting leaders, go to www.supportingleaders.org. Here you'll find links to the YouTube versions of our interviews and links to the podcast. You'll also find articles on leadership. To join in on the conversation, find the Supporting Leaders group on Facebook and find us on Instagram at Supporting Leaders.